Hey guys, it's Chase of csjoseph.life doing another episode for Season 19, How to Cognitively Develop Each of the Individual Types. This is basically the path to enlightenment, the path to personal growth for each of the 16 types. We're going to be discussing the ESFP today as part of our current season, which is 19 for our Patreon Gold Tier series as well. Thank you for joining me tonight. Got plenty of lectures to film this evening, so going to be trying to make quick work of this one while making sure to stay on track. I wanted to do like a separate episode about ESFPs because this particular lecture, given that it's my super ego, it carries a lot more difficulty with me because ESFPs are pretty difficult for me to understand at certain times. Although as I practice use of my own personal superego, I maintain that there's a chance. Wow, my hair's like standing up. There's a chance that I'll get to know them a little bit closer as I get to know myself with them moving forward. So anyway, but let's talk about ESFPs and I was gonna make a bonus episode relating to this particular lecture for season 1 to talk about causality because causality has a lot to do with ESFPs and their point of view in terms of cognitive development. So, but anyway, so ESFPs have been known, as the entertainer or the performer, etc. But as entertaining and performing that they can be, and try to get as much attention as possible, I would like to think of ESFPs more of like a conductor. And I know that we have labeled the ESFPs duelists, and the reason why they're duelists or like swashbucklers basically is because of that incessant need to conduct attention towards the correct things. But it can be done in a chaotic manner or an orderly manner, as we are aware of the cognitive gateways and how they manifest and change human behavior as a human being grows throughout their cognitive development. Each of the four sides of the mind, a person can enter in from a chaotic way or an orderly way. Kind of like when you're taking a giant jug of water and trying to fill up a smaller water bottle with this huge jug of water, and if it's full to the max, the water's gonna pour out of the water jug chaotically, and not really that orderly until enough air gets into the water jug, and then the stream of water comes out very smooth and precise. But I think that's basically, quite frankly, the experience that ESFPs have consistently. And while their purpose is often seen by many people to just be straight up entertaining, or I disagree, or a performer, I really disagree with that. I think what the ESFP exists to do is to spark a revolution of systems, to spark a revolution of causality itself, and achieve a higher level mastery of truth that can be obtained so that we could literally engineer any way through the means of a system, a master system, to solve real world problems. And I believe that the ESFP does this as a result of their mastery of causality. Which it's kind of funny because if you look at them from a virtue and vice standpoint, you have their vice, which is instant gratification, and then their virtue is delayed gratification. I think gratification of its own right is demonstrative of causality because oftentimes, ESFPs that I've been exposed to, I've been married to, ESFPs that I've coached, oftentimes they're not really aware of the consequences of their actions, and I maintain this is their greatest weakness. And it's funny, as much as I criticize ESFPs for their lack of awareness of causality, I realize that if they're actually willing to listen instead of trying to tell other people how they feel about everything and what they believe, but they're actually willing to listen to others, they can take that knowledge and put it together and actually chart a map out to basically the cause, to the better end of the effect, so that they end up having mastery of the effect instead of the cause. And I think this is absolutely, absolutely necessary. It's kind of interesting. And ESFPs in my life that I have met, they can be insanely brilliant, and they're so brilliant in such a way that when I encounter them, I find out that they're like these amazing electronics engineering technologists. They're fantastic technologists. And but you get into a debate with one, and there's one thing an ENTP doesn't like debating. If there's any type that we just don't like debating, it's the ESFP, because that TI trickster is constantly like, ooh, anything can be true, right? And so, but the thing is though, you have to understand something about TI trickster. TI trickster, in of its own right, when you're looking at someone making an argument that anything can be true, that is a huge strength, actually. It's a huge strength because the ESFP ends up, because of their attitude towards truth, and there's no such thing as absolute truth and anything can be true, this actually inadvertently causes them to have the effect of arriving, albeit accidentally, to the highest level of truth in all of the cosmos. Uh, ESFPs like accidentally discover amazing technologies, right? I've been watching a lot of Star Trek recently, and others, they got teleportation technology, they got replication technology, which nowadays it's 3D printing for us, and it's just going to get better and better and better. But the point is that ESFPs, like, they're so interesting because they don't really know what the truth is, but they stumble upon the truth consistently. And it's because of this process of stumbling over and over, this chaotic process of stumbling, they end up stumbling upon an order. They end up discovering an order. And then when they start putting things together in order, they start to understand the cause. And because they can understand a cause, they can create a master system to get any effect that they actually desire, because they have the freedom to do so. It's not that ESFPs are trying to create the ultimate performance, the ultimate orchestra, the ultimate symphony. It's more that they're trying to start a process of putting together like a multi-causal construct to create an unlimited potential effect. And it's kind of funny because you're like, well, wait a minute, Mr. C.S. Joseph, they have expert intuition demon. How is that even possible? The reason is because there is still metaphysical behavior to extroverted sensing hero. Extroverted sensing itself, it understands memories of the past. It's like psychometry. If you look at psychometry, from a mental point of view, it is aware of physical objects having, memories of the past. And those memories, excuse me, those memories, they don't have to be the ESFPs. It could be anyone's memories. They are aware of other people's history. They are aware of, this is why ESFPs oftentimes end up becoming really cool archaeologists, because they're trying to rediscover the past. They're trying to rediscover the cause of the past of something that could have been like catastrophic. Like, for example, a Pompeian archaeological dig. ESFPs are all over that. They love it. They love to just get their hands dirty, get into the dirt, and discover things and find out what the cause was of something that had taken place in the past. Then as they discover those causes, and they do this with patience, they do this through delayed gratification instead of instant gratification, it allows them to actually see the bigger picture with their extroverted sensing hero, such that they can completely comprehend any cause, which gives them full mastery over producing any effect that they desire within the confines of the specific cause that they've discovered. Because if they discover a cause, they can actually recreate that cause and make that cause with a little bit of adjustment to get other desired outcomes. And it becomes this amazing web of outcomes and ultimate potential, such that they can actually generate beaten paths with their introvert intuition inferior, and it becomes an aspirational function as a result of developing the second gateway of the mind. But so this is quite frankly the ultimate purpose of the ESFP. It's really dueling their way through life and coming up with a way to give them the mastery of causality, which unlocks their INTJ subconscious to develop master systems based on a collection of causalities, so that they can end up producing unlimited effects based on bending those causalities to their will. And that's a very metaphysical way of saying, just they're taking something that pre-exists or has existed before, and they're trying to create a desired effect as a result of taking those building blocks. It's kind of like taking your hand into the chaos of a Lego bin and then pulling out random Legos and then creating something new of it. The chaos of those, they're literally taking those building blocks. And oftentimes they're trying to figure out which building block fits best. And that INTJ subconscious sense of perfection goads them on, and they're trying to create the ultimate performance. And by doing so, they end up discovering the ultimate causality. And they do this by rejecting any building block that may or may not fit, depending on what their mood is as they're continuing to experiment. I have to say that ESFPs are outstanding experimentalists, and I have to respect them in the area. Usually design is given to the ENTP, but in terms of tinkering, and it's not necessarily tinkering with Legos or tinkering in such a way that like an INTP would tinker. They're more of like tinkering with ideas. They're tinkering with research. They're tinkering with what other people think and trying to identify the cause of multiple, like say, if there's like a hypothesis from a scientific standpoint, or even an experiment that was done, and they see the cause of the experiment, and then they see the effect that the experiment generated, but they see that with multiple experiments running simultaneously, and then they could take all that information across all those experiments and then find a master cause to create a master effect that they are trying to look for. And they just kind of like bumble their way through these things. It's amazing, but the only way that they're able to achieve this is through delayed gratification. The reason why is that even the ESFP is at risk of not being able to see the trees for the forest because they're stuck at the forest, they're stuck at that bird's eye view, and they have a hard time zooming into the specifics. That's really only because of their vice of instant gratification. If they would be more patient, they would actually be able to discover those truths behind the causalities they're trying to look for to be able to build that desired effect. The thing is, though, is that they have to have absolute freedom to do so. And because they don't have the burden of, of TI, they are able to actually discover those hidden truths. It's kind of like how, a baby or a child is running through a minefield and somehow the child makes it all the way through. That's literally what TE Child is all about. It's able to bumble its way around to ultimately find the truth and then tell other people the truth. And when that truth is actually provided to TI users, they can improve upon it or build additional systems upon it that could ultimately change the world or the rest of humanity as we know it. So yeah, their virtue and vice, they need delayed gratification in order to do this. If they continue to give in to instant gratification, it will be done as a result of their selfish ends, which can be a problem for ESFPs because ESFPs are some of the most selfish of all the types because of FI parent just innately is just selfish. But the way that they spend their time and how they're fascinated with things, especially through their INTJ subconscious, that selfishness ends up becoming a gift because they're able to discover that master system, that master process to provide a desired outcome that benefits everyone around them. And new technologies and ideas are discovered all the time as a result of the consistent experimentation of an ESFP. I mean, just look at how they dress. Every single way they dress is an experiment every day. There's nothing, it's always anew. It's always being renewed. Like, ESFPs are all about renewing and, not staying in a fixed point, they're like unable to stay in one simple place. I mean, this is one of the reasons why they're accused consistently of having of being ADD and ADHD, and that's not something, I'd recommend for anyone, but ESFPs consistently have that problem. I feel bad for them at times because they're labeled this way when they're really just being who they are. And we just have to accept that, this whole idea that, oh, you have to be normal in a certain way because X amount of the majority of the population is that way. That's not necessarily okay for ESFPs or anyone for that matter. So, but let's talk about ESFPs a little bit more. Their communication style is a starter type. They start things all the time. They have a hard time finishing. They're informative, so they're indirect with their speech. They're initiating, they like to go to other people to initiate things. They love attention. Attention is everything to them. And that's really what motivates them on this path of discovery to find these causalities is basically because they understand that their reward for doing so, because ESFPs, let's be honest, are quite coin operated. Their reward for doing so is recognition or like a high level of credit as well as everyone's attention. You can understand that an INTJ subconscious out there really highly desires to win the Nobel Peace Prize, because the Nobel Peace Prize is something that is remembered forever within recorded history, and they definitely want to make that permanent mark so that people can understand their name. And I think the Nobel Peace Prize definitely defines exactly everything an ESFP would want out of life. To be that brilliant intellectual slash academic who discovered a new technology or a new way of doing things to better all of mankind, and then they're rewarded with all the credit and the attention, especially given their humble upbringing where no one even believed that they were smart enough to ever obtain that. When the truth of the matter is, because of that lack of TI, which earns them that moniker of basically stupid, is actually exactly what they need in order to discover the truth itself. That, in a nutshell, is the best way that I could candidly describe, outside of using the psychological mumbo jumbo, to describe why, and how ESFPs develop as human beings from an immature ESFP to a mature ESFP. But remember, the path to enlightenment for everyone is different, but it does have some similarities. Enlightenment is all about cognitive integration. You have four sides of the mind. You have the ego, you have the subconscious, you have the shadow or the unconscious, and you have the superego. And everyone's mind is basically disjointed and disintegrated. And it's important to integrate your mind so that you can become whole or holy, complete, and lacking nothing, at least as far as that's allowed within this reality as we know it. But for the ESFP, especially in our culture, it's extremely hard to do so. They're so motivated by status, they're so motivated by the moment and being a present creature that they're just so unaware of the consequences of their actions that because of that, they're not necessarily able to devote themselves to that level of self-discovery. Not only that, statistically speaking, ESFPs are like the worst of all the types in terms of finances. They have the highest debt per capita, for example, next to ISFPs, and really just, even though they can be some of the greatest financial minds ever, they really end up, and they're very good at managing other people's money. In fact, actually getting into banking or high finance is something I highly recommend to ESFPs. More like money management, not necessarily money strategy, although they can become very strategic over time and develop amazing strategies, like if they're getting involved with a hedge fund, but only as like a latter part of their career, not something like right off the beginning. But yeah, like just understand, ESFPs, like everyone else, needs to be able to bring their the four sides of their minds together to that end. And this is done through developing the four cognitive gateways. And we've talked about this in multiple episodes of season 19, and that is the hero function, the inferior function, the nemesis, aka villain function, as well as the demon function. And the reason why is that when you integrate all four sides of your mind, you're that much closer to enlightenment, and then eventually your superego ends up becoming that thing that you could utilize, within your mind. It's willing to join the rest of your mind and become integrated so that you as a human being can become whole. Well, this is very hard for people to accept because the superego itself, it's demonic in nature. And the reason why it's demonic in nature is because it recognizes that it's more powerful than the rest of the other sides of the mind, and it honestly looks down upon the ego. It looks down upon the subconscious. It looks down upon the shadow or the unconscious consistently because the superego doesn't trust the other sides of the mind, and it's especially difficult, especially in first world culture, for ESFPs to get to a point where their superego is in a position to actually trust them. And the reason why is because the superego consistently points out to everyone, this is not just for ESFPs, but this is for everyone, that the ego lacks personal responsibility, has that sense. And that's especially hard for ESFPs. And then the subconscious lacks humility. and then the unconscious lacks wisdom. And in my life, and this is actually a personal bias of mine, but in my life, I've actually met a ton of ESFPs who do have humility, and this is in men and women, but they can be insanely foolish, and they can be also insanely irresponsible. And I've met some wise ESFPs and some humble ESFPs, but very rarely do I meet responsible ESFPs. And again, they're an SP, and SP types in general like to push out their responsibility because they see they see responsibility as this thing that holds them back from their freedom of choice. And no one takes freedom of choice more seriously than an ESFP. Let's be honest. I mean, you could argue that an ESTP does, but that FI parent combined with that NI inferior, it really causes the ESFP to selfishly put their choice above everybody else. This is why, ESFPs, like SE heroes, struggle with postpartum depression more than anybody else because they see having that child as a mother as something that's taking away their choice, taking away their freedom. And that's definitely not a healthy thing for a mother to do. And this is why, the ESFP needs a lot of dutiful support because of that freedom of choice, because they're making decisions based on their mood. This is why their golden silver pair is SFJs. SFJs are dutifully nurturing the ESFP at all times because the ESFP, let's be honest, is super high maintenance. And, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. They're high maintenance because they at least give the SFJs, who are so self-deprecating to begin with, that they have the opportunity of being that high maintenance for the ESFP in exchange for unlimited sympathy from the ESFP and exchange to all the plans and processes and systems that the ESFP could potentially confer upon the SFJs when the SFJ systems are lacking because they lack extroverted thinking. So based on that, the SFJs can rely on the healthy input of an ESFP to make sure that their thinking is in the right place and make sure that their beliefs are not going the wrong way and that they are not ignorant. The ESFP maintains, it protects their SFJs from ignorance, provided the ESFP is not ignorant themselves. But more on that later. We'll talk more about that in probably in the season 17 episode 8 or 9. I accidentally recently misnamed the episode number because or maybe I didn't. Maybe I actually did it correctly now that I think about it, because I forgot that part 2 of the superego did not count as its own episode, so I'll have to double check my numbers on that. But anyway, so yeah, 4 sides, 4 gateways. And, the ESFP ego, we talked a little bit about it, but they all about living in the moment. They have a very high moral fiber, but then this causes them to potentially be selfish. They make decisions based on their mood, not necessarily based on the truth. They're childishly aware of what other people are thinking at all times. Then because of this, their status or their position or their station amongst other people is super, super important. And it's funny, though, as freedom-focused as an ESFP is, oftentimes you could see an ESFP be a total slave to what other people think of them. And then it actually ends up, because of what other people think of them, because of, their status amongst others, you can actually literally watch an ESFP be dutiful to others, to their ISFJ shadow, specifically because they don't want their status to be lost amongst certain people that they respect or admire, or people that they need something from. And I've always found that absolutely interesting. It also basically gives SFJ and TP Quadra the ability to ultimately coquette the ESFP forever, and the ESFP will be stuck in their web because the ESFP ultimately over time is rendered dependent upon the SFJ and TP Quadra. Because of that dependency, they don't want to lose their status with the SFJ NTP Quadra because they do not want the SFJ or the NTP to exact revenge upon them or mete out justice upon them. They would rather avoid that at all costs. So oftentimes the ESFP is willing to sacrifice their choice for the sake of reputation and status. And this is where oftentimes crusader manipulation can come into play when it comes to a wayfarer like an ESFP. So, gosh, there's so much content to cover with ESFPs. I'll be honest, ESFP is one of the hardest types for me to cover, and it's one of the reasons why it took a little bit longer for this lecture to get out, because I just had to make sure I was doing it right. It's been this particular lecture has been pretty hard for me. I have a feeling a couple other types will be pretty difficult, but ESFP is really hard for me to do. Probably the hardest for me to do out of all the 16 types. Anytime I do a lecture about them. So, but yeah, I haven't gotten much sleep recently. But anyway, so yeah, and then the subconscious is like this INTJ. It's like this the strategist who's able to find any pathway through any system and able to achieve mastery over creating systems or using an existing system or improving the efficiencies of an existing system to be able to continue their quest for causality. It's so interesting watching an ESFP trying to identify concrete proof of causality because they could see the results, and it's like, I just want to prove what's actually happening because TE child has to know. I have to know. And they're like, oh, I want to pick your brain because I want you to tell me about what's actually happening, because TI Trickster creates this insatiable curiosity within ESFPs because they're completely curious as to what's happening in the reality around them because they just don't know the truth about reality. And because they just don't know the truth about reality, they're trying to discover the hidden meanings and bumble their way through the hidden meanings behind why reality is the way it is. They see it's real, they just don't know anything about it, and they're trying to find the truth, and they just end up becoming this insane truth seeker. And so they experiment through their INTJ subconscious and trade their freedom of choice and trade their mood in exchange for trying to find the truth and trying to find the ultimate cause so that they can understand the effect, which is themselves. The ESFP sees themselves as an effect, and they're trying to find the cause that is led to that effect. And then look at the ISFJ. We spoke about that earlier, but they're very worried about their own experience. They're worried that they don't have enough memories to be able to keep things fresh. Like they run out of memories to play as cards because they feel like they play memories like cards and then they lose those memories forever. And they're very critical towards how other people feel and what other people value. They see that they responsibly value things, but they see other people be like they just don't even know what to value. And that's why to ESFPs, it's where their pragmatism comes from because they're very pragmatic in as much as they're concrete as we just spoke about. But they do not really care about other people's value systems. It doesn't mean anything to them. And the only time they ever get caught in value systems is usually when they end up becoming dependent upon SFJs or NTPs, when they become dependent on Crusader types. And Crusader types almost always have a faith that they follow. And so as a result of that, the ESFP ends up having no choice but to adopt that faith for the sake of their own survival, for the sake of their own freedom of choice, for the sake of their status with the Crusader. And they better mind their P's and Q's. And their ISFJ unconscious exists to actually, hold this together. The problem is that their ISFJ subconscious, while it's supposed to be focused on knowing the truth and verifying the truth, it just lacks the capability entirely. And then the ESFP ends up relying on other people telling them what the truth is, and then they have to just choose what they believe based on what sounds truthy or readily acceptable until they can try to get to a point where they can experiment and have concrete extroverted sensing proof through their INTJ subconscious that it's actually true. And only then can they really, really accept that their beliefs are actually in line with the truth because of the physical evidence that they have in front of them. However, an ESFP could end up devoting their entire lives to that premise, which can oftentimes leave them behind. So ENTP superego, it's a little bit more, it's a lot more interesting. It really exists as a rogue, and sometimes the ESFP they can get very roguish when they're in their demon, and it's all about them. Kleptomania, for example. Being a pirate, take what you can, give nothing back, is basically the ENTP demon. as well as taking away other people's futures or choices, taking away the freedom of others. So in order for the ESFP to ensure freedom, oftentimes it has to prevent other people from taking away their choice, and that could be through injury or maiming, or it could be with destroying the reputation or causing people to not value other people and instead to value the ESFP. And the ESFP uses the rogue superego to basically eliminate all forms of competition, because competition could potentially get in the way of their freedom of choice, and they need to get out of that situation consistently. And it's funny because they can kind of be really hypocritical about that, because they'd have all the good parts of those relationships with people if the ESFP was more responsible. But due to their instant gratification, their lack of responsibility, people end up taking away their choice, or at least competing with them for attention, because, let's be honest, ESFPs can be attention whores, and when they are trying to soak up that much attention consistently, the ESFP can, when they're trying to do that, their roguish behavior will come out, and they'll start a chain of events from a distance that will ultimately cause a person to fail or be eliminated as competition. And in some cases, that could be murder, like a hidden, well-planned murder, or it's just ESFPs can be devious in that way, and most people don't even suspect the ESFP, because the ESFP is just TI trickster. Anything is true, right? I have the reputation of being a dum-dum, but the reality of the situation is that I'm very conniving, and you better watch your back, because the knife will be in your back if you're not looking, right? Because it's like, ooh, I'm this person that's always frontal, and I'll duel you in front of your face. But then when you turned around, the duel is over. Whether I've won or lost, when your back is turned, I'll land my killing blow, right? So ESFPs can go that far, and that's one of the examples of cognitive disintegration, and one of the things that inhibits their ability on their path to enlightenment. It's true instant gratification. The rogue is willing to steal what they want now because they'd rather have it now. And that's ultimately what any demon is, because NI inferior ends up resenting that they don't have the choice to get what they want right now. And because of that, they're willing to use any pragmatic means necessary to achieve what it is they actually want, even if it comes at the expense of their fellow human beings, which can be a problem. But anyway, ESFPs, though, they can be pretty brilliant if they apply themselves and focus on not necessarily competing with others for attention, but competing with themselves, such that they make themselves someone who is worthy of other people's attention. And then if they focus on making themselves worthy for attention, the ESFP can get to a point where they're actually able to further accept themselves, because they realize that the key to having full freedom of choice for the ESFP ultimately is to provide themselves with a way or a system or a method with which they can do to make them consistently and definitely worthy of people's attention. Because to an ESFP, the more attention they get, the more freedom they have. Which is kind of interesting, and the same thing goes with status. This is oftentimes why ESFPs love them some treasure, because treasure to them, their TE child to them, money to them represents freedom of choice. I have more choices because I have more money. And this is why you can see all those marketing or sales programs out there focused on selling people into, to making more money per month within their business. And ESFPs are like the first people to sign up, or and this is why ESFPs are amazing in sales as a result, right? It all comes from instant gratification. TE child loves it some money because money represents the ability to get anything they want instantly without having to wait for it. So just understand, they could be a little avaricious in this way, but then again, so can any Wayfarer type, SFP, NTJ, Quadra. They can be pretty avaricious, with the ENTJ being the worst. So it's funny, I was just having a conversation with an ENTJ, and I literally called him out for being selfish and greedy and avaricious, because he just continues to think that it's okay to take from me, and he's never given me anything. So I'm like, okay, well, you're obviously using me, so get out of my life. And I kicked him out of my life. I've been kicking out a lot of ENTJs from my life recently for the same reason, and quite honestly, I'm getting tired of it. I wish they just like realize that they should be human instead of just think that this world is just their playground for their taking for some reason. So, but anyway, so the path to enlightenment for an ESFP, they need to start learning personal responsibility. And quite honestly, this is in my opinion. This is an opinion, not necessarily truth, but this is my opinion. It is my opinion that getting FI parent and an ESFP within first world culture to understand personal responsibility is insanely difficult. This is an ESFP who can't resist who can resist the impulsive urges of running up their credit cards, for example, or not opening up a new credit card at Victoria's Secret or at Macy's or Nordstrom or whatever. These are the people, and I'm not talking about women. Men have this problem big time, where men end up having like insane lines of credit instead of actually having cash in the bank, which is a problem. And then because they have that TI trickster, it's just like, ooh, credit is just the same as money, right? No, not really, right? I actually had to pay off many thousands of dollars of my ex-wife's credit card debt, and I bought her a car, and I had to pay her an entire year's worth of rent as well, because of, said avaricious nature. And this is not me telling her that she's a bad person. You know, I we all have our issues, but for her specifically, this is one of the biggest struggles in her area. And I remember the one day where she came to me and she actually took full responsibility for actions, and she apologized and said, yeah, you don't know this, but I've been running up credit cards all this time and there's a lot of debt and I don't know what to do. Please help. I don't know what to do. So I had to step in and solve that problem. And thankfully, that has all gone away since then, and I'm very happy that that was the case. So, and her and our children are in a safer place, and she's got a new man in her life, and she's about to give birth to a new child by that new man, and she even got herself a golden pair. So, congratulations to her. I'm very happy that she's in a much better place and has a man who will challenge her in as much nurture her, and a man who will make her dependent upon him, so that she can continue to hold her account, so that he can continue to hold her accountable, which is fantastic. But yeah, the ESFP basically, when they're utilizing the first gateway and becoming less chaotic with it, and it's not about, making decisions, every decision based on their mood, on a whim, and being so whimsical, because ESFPs, let's be honest, they're whimsical. Instead, they realize that their mood has to be tempered. And they realize that, oh, I can have good things, but, because ESFPs for the most part are materialistic AF, they end up being willing to wait. They end up being more responsible with their mood, and they do not allow their mood to allow them to be so whimsical with their instant gratification behavior. It's such that where it becomes that their mood itself gets in the way and ends up realizing the burden that is brought along with being so materialistic. And, ESFPs, I never actually really considered ESFPs hoarders. I've always thought NFPs or STJs were kind of worse at hoarding. But I have noted that ESFPs can hoard a lot of junk over time. And luckily they can get rid of it. Like, and then if there's a breakup and there's all these totems of this person in their life and they just have to do a purge, which is perfectly normal for extroverted sensors. But over time, like keepsakes with their ISFJ unconscious just start piling up and they can't really escape from it. But the thing is that their FI parent over time recognizes the burden of becoming materialistic, because the burden increased upon them as a result actually inhibits them from their freedom of choice. It inhibits their freedom of choice. So their FI parent ends up having to develop, because they realize that debt is a burden, right? They realize that owning so many things is a burden when moving, and they don't like putting all these burdens on themselves. And because of these burdens that they end up encountering, their FI parent ends up developing. The best way, if you have an ESFP child or an ESFP spouse, the best way to actually cause their sense of responsibility to come out through their FI parent is to saddle them up with as many burdens as possible, to the point where they have no choice but to ask for help. And then they learn that if they make these impulsive, instant gratification decisions, they're actually saddling themselves up with a lot of burdens, which inhibits their freedom of choice later. Like having sex with a random person, and because TI tricksters technically, statistically, to my knowledge, end up having, like if they're a woman, end up getting pregnant, because TI tricksters seem to be more irresponsible with using condoms and birth control than the other types, and it's especially true of ESFPs. I would venture to guess, I don't know this is true, but this is just a guess, but my educated guess would be that ESFPs out of all the types have more abortions per type than any other woman. And you can talk about that because they see the child as potentially a something that inhibits their freedom of choice. And if you're an ESFP and you're watching this and you've had abortions, I get it. I understand where you're coming from with that. I would like to state, though, I am actually pro-life. I maintain that abortion is wrong. However, I'm not so naive as to expect the world to behave that way either. So I do support women's choice for abortion, provided under one condition, and I'll share my philosophy on abortion here, and it's this. If women have the right to choose to abort a child, then men should be given the right to abandon a child. If that's really what happens, then the world would become, at least in the United States of America, would become a much better place, because then women are forced to be responsible, because there's always a chance that their men would just abandon them if they end up getting pregnant. So, and a lot of people disagree with me on that, but Dave Chappelle agrees with me on this. So also does my wife, but just recognize that freedom of choice is really, really important to ESFPs, but ESFPs, even more than freedom of choice, oftentimes don't want to be abandoned. And I think that particular rule affects ESFPs more than anyone, because guess what? It's fair. It's actually fair. So you look at Solomon, and they're bringing a child, and two mothers are claiming the child, and he's like, cut the child in half and give one half to the other. And then the mother of the child says, no, 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 let the other woman have the child, let the child live. And that's how Solomon knew that the real mother was the mother who was willing to give up the child, because no mother would allow the child to die in that capacity. While the other woman is like, yeah, 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 let's do that, right? Because there's some apparent jealousy there. So Solomon's wisdom was able to see through that. And that's why you can see the wisdom of my recommendation with how the entire world handles abortion, moving forward. Like, if you are going to give women the right to choose, then you better give men the right to choose too, because that's what's fair. If you're not doing that, then feminism is actually just a lie. Feminism is not actually, an ideal. It's actually a burden in of its own right. So maybe we should stop burdening people, and maybe we should make sure that there's enough shared burden so that people start taking responsibility for their actions. And that's exactly what ESFPs need to learn. Now, I know that some people don't like that I've just, utilized an abortion example, but I mean, I'm not wrong. Like, it's a fact. Like, let's be straight, So, it's funny, people are like, oh, there's no way that you understand all these statistics. And, okay, yeah, sure, I could see the arguments for that. But the data that we're gathering, especially within the coaching practice and through other, social media related means, the reports that we're able to generate are pretty interesting. And I think within the next year, we're going to actually start releasing this information to the public as we're able to gather more of it and actually refine the accuracy. I think people will be pleasantly surprised to see what we have to say in terms of the statistics. And I'm sure all you TE users, especially you ESFPs trying to understand causality to get the effect that you want, will have that master system that to be able to get any effect that you want. You would love to have that information, and it'll be my honor to give it to you when the time comes. So. But anyway, FI parent has to develop, and it really happens because the TE child and the SE hero end up on this cognitive loop, which causes this insane instant gratification impulsivity, but the delayed gratification is definitely hampered by the FI parent developing, because the FI parent realizes, hey, I feel bad that I have all these burdens inhibiting my freedom of choice. It's not just that I have to protect my TE child from believing the wrong thing, I also have to protect my freedom of choice. So it's now I have a kid, which is my TE child, but I also have a little baby, and that's my NI inferior, and I need to protect that. So if my parent gets in and is like, yeah, I'm not in the mood for having those burdens. I actually know the effect of that cause. I actually know the consequences of my impulsive actions, like an unwanted pregnancy. I am not in the mood for that. And then over time, you start to see the ESFP not being so whimsical, especially with, one night stands. So, and the second gateway. So we just discussed them getting their sense of personal responsibility through FI apparent, which basically they end up having principles and personal standards, right? They develop these personal standards to keep themselves in check, so that they always guarantee that they have freedom of choice, right? It's a set of principles. Uh, you know, but the second gateway is introverted intuition, inferior, and when it's chaotic, it's all about what they want. That's where the source of impulsivity comes about. But when it's aspirational, they end up starting to want the right things. They start to want different things, and they end up becoming more organized. The TE child gets upgraded to a TE parent, and the INTJ subconscious is not necessarily about having that amazing performance. It's not about always looking good. It's not always about being perfect. It ends up becoming the ESFP is looking for perfection. It's looking for a desired outcome. It's looking for the effect. And if the ESFP ego becomes the cause, the INTJ subconscious becomes the effect. And they're trying to create new experiments to find the ultimate effect of what they're trying to do, because if they have the ultimate effect, it becomes the ultimate performance, right? That's why they experiment so much with everything, including their clothing, right? So having that ultimate effect is definitely something that is, it's absolutely necessary, right? So how do you deal with that? Well, TE rationale ends up becoming a bit more responsible. The child ends up becoming a parent within its own right, within the family of the four sides of the mind. Because let's be honest, each of the people or the cognitive functions on the four sides of the mind, it's all just one big family, and they're all growing basically within a family and acting out as a family within. And the family is divided in different little mini families, and two adults and two children, right? If you think about it, and all of a sudden everyone's grown up, and the child function has grown up when in INTJ subconscious, and they're more organized, they're more specific, they're more researched before they make a decision. And you could tell when an ESFP is being whimsical and impulsive is when they don't do very much research before they make a decision. And this can open them up to a ton of more burdens, like debt, for example, or unwanted pregnancy that inhibits their freedom of choice, and they don't want to do that anymore. So as a result, they realize they have to be, they have to humble themselves. They have to humble themselves and realize that they don't really know everything. And they have to realize that their opinion is just not that valuable. And so they're able to learn that humility through their subconscious, specifically by doing more research. They come to terms with the fact that they just don't know everything. And as a result, they become vicious researchers, where they have to research every little detail about every little thing before they know what they want. And this actually can be amazing for ESFPs, because out of the two NI inferiors, the ESFP ends up being able to become more decisive than even the ESTP, which is amazing if you think about it. And it's all because the ESFP's TE child is actually able to perform that research and be able to make an educated guess or an educated decision to execute on what it is they want. Whereas the ESTP, not so much. They don't have that research capability. They're more of like, well, do you value this? Oh, okay, great, then I'll do that. Where it's basically dependent upon the value system of the other person. Whereas from an ESFP standpoint, that's not the case. That's not actually true. The ESFP has the ability to make their NI inferior aspirational through research, and they can become decisive. Sure, the ESFP ends up going to 8 colleges and changing their major a million times, but eventually they end up doing all of the research and have so much knowledge that they have stored that they can actually make those decisions, become decisive themselves, instead of being this indecisive heap that they usually are most of the time. And that really comes through humility, where the ESFP just recognizes that they don't really know anything at all. So they end up trying to find out. And this is why TE child and TE inferiors, I always tell them, hey, you need to go out of your way to basically, how's the best way for me to say it? to research, to read. They have to read at all times, right? And then as a result of that, they are able to develop the humility that they need to be able to pull that off. And then their INTJ is able to get all the research necessary so that they can experiment responsibly. And then as a result of experimenting responsibly, they can end up having mastery of causality so that they can end up generating whatever desired effect they want with their INTJ. And it's all as a result of combining their personal responsibility with their sense of humility. It's amazing. But moving on to the unconscious now, the third gateway that they have to develop is their nemesis function. This is where they worry about their past. This is where they worry that they don't have enough memories. They worry that they don't ever have enough experience to do things and do new things all the time, which leads to this potential never-ending need to experiment with like literally everything. Everything is an experiment at all times. You can think of ESFPs as like these little mini mad scientists where everything is an experiment or everything is swordplay or everything is a dance, basically. Hence why they're dualists. That's why they just can't take what someone says at face value, because they need, a responsible and a humble ESFP will have to research it or provide counterpoints based on their research to see if the TI user that they're talking to is actually true with what they're saying, because they don't know what the truth is and they're just having someone make a claim, so they have to actually research every single claim before they feel good enough to actually believe that claim. But the ISFJ is a little bit different. It's behind the scenes. Sometimes, in the abuse that ESFPs, especially ESFP women, often endure, I have seen ESFP women consistently battered down and used. The archetype of ESFP women, oftentimes you hear people like Tom Likas referring to them as toilets, basically, where men just, have their way with them, which is absolutely pathetic to me. And ESFP women end up becoming used, and they end up closing themselves off from reality, which is SE Hero, because eventually SE Hero starts to hate the reality that they're in. And they go deep into their shadow and go into the behind the scenes, within the darkness, within the shadows. And they basically close themselves off to other people. I've seen this also in ESFP men, and it's very sad. And it's to the point where they don't even care that much about having that freedom of choice. And they realize that their foolishness combined with their irresponsibility has just created these insane burdens within them. And these burdens that they have, burdens of debt, burdens of unwanted pregnancy, burdens of no freedom, burdens of poverty, burdens of very poor health, all these burdens that they have, these ESFPs have, you have to use their ISFJ, unconscious to endure. And this endurance, they worry that they'll have to endure forever in the ditch. And this can be a problem, and it's all as a result of their foolishness. And it's usually because they end up chasing the values of other people instead of understanding their own principles. Another reason why you'd want FI parent developed. But ESFPs end up lacking in those principles. And that lack of principles is what inhibits them and causes them to fall behind. But it's also they end up following the principles of others instead of relying upon their own principles, and that causes them to have even more burdens saddled up. Think about it. Society tells them it's okay to have one night stands. Society tells them, they end up believing these things like, you can't get pregnant on your first, if you're a virgin, for example, like, and they end up believing these false value systems that people end up having, and it just is foolishness, and it ends up creating more burdens and disastrous result. An ESFP is basically as much as an ISFJ would be considered a beast of burden, the ESFP's life is avoiding becoming a beast of burden. And oftentimes an ESFP child or someone in their youth causes themselves to become a beast of burden, and they're clawing their way out of that ditch forever. Well, that's because of this foolishness and because their FE critic is underdeveloped. Basically, the parent function needs to be developed. And remember, folks, in order to reach enlightenment, the path to enlightenment is to unlock all four of your gateways so that you can actually grow the parent functions of each of the four sides of the mind. And after you've achieved the growth of all the parent functions of each of the four sides of your mind, at that point, you've reached enlightenment. And need to be committed to continuous improvement for the rest of your life. which is kind of interesting because if you think about it, out of all of the 16 types, the ESFP probably embodies Kaizen, which is continuous improvement, more than any of the other types. And it's exemplified through the ISFJ unconscious because they learn perseverance. They learn that they don't have to worry about bad experiences because the ESFP discovers that they are really strong. The ESFP discovers that they can persevere their way through anything, ultimately. And especially when they realize that people value the wrong things and people value the wrong belief systems and they don't understand appropriately. And any system that inhibits freedom, their own freedom of choice, they end up throwing away. And it's interesting because the ESFP can guilt other people, manipulate people through guilt. But then when someone tries to guilt them, at first it may have worked, but not anymore as they've been saddled up with more permanent burdens, right? And they have their freedom of choice taken away. They will not allow this to happen. So over time, as a result of getting over their worry about having burdens and realizing that burdens come and I have the strength and the perseverance and steadfastness to get through any burdens, then I will not be so whimsical in adopting other people's value systems and focus on developing my personal value system. This is one of the reasons why I maintain that the critic function as well as the parent function of the subconscious ends up being developed even before the ESFP's actual parent function oftentimes. Because a lot of ESFPs that I know are so stuck in their shadow, like it's so common. It's very rare, extremely rare that we meet one like Taylor Swift, for example, who's in her subconscious, right? It's very, very rare that we even see that whatsoever, because she had the opportunity to develop her subconscious, but very few ESFPs ever have that point. And it especially gets even more difficult for them because they're statistically some of the lowest income earners out of all of the types due to that instant gratification behavior. And it's not until they're past middle age that they finally gain the mental tools to actually deal with this. So it's very rare that you find, an ESFP who's not stuck in their shadow in some capacity. I have not met very many of them. I've only met a few subconscious focused ESFPs out there, and quite honestly, they're very amazing human beings. But after gaining the wisdom of using their extroverted feeling critic and realizing that there are things that they should be guilty about, but also things that they should protect themselves from other people guilting them, but to also understand that they do have a duty, and that sometimes it is their duty to take on some burdens because they are grateful. FE Critic teaches the ESFP gratitude because the burdens that they have been saddled upon themselves are often solved by the support from others, especially SFJs. And this creates a wise sense of gratitude, and that sense of gratitude, along with that sense of personal responsibility, protects them. Gratitude is ultimately how an ESFP unlocks their wisdom. So they have to be as grateful as possible, and without gratitude, they're not really going to get there. And they have to show gratitude consistently through their SE hero, because gratitude's all SFJs ever wanted from them anyway. If you're an ESFP and you're ungrateful, what are you doing? Like, seriously, what are you doing? Watch the lover archetype episodes in season 13. I highly recommend that if you're an ESFP, because it really teaches you the meaning of gratitude and not taking things for granted. ESFPs all too often take people and what they value and what they believe for granted, and they often take people for granted, and because they take people for granted, they come off very selfish. And it's foolish to take people for granted, because the ESFP will either find themselves abandoned and have to face all of the burdens that they put on themselves alone, or or they won't be able to find all of the different causes to be able to create an effect that they're looking for, because they're trying to find that master cause. So after developing the wisdom from FE Critic, as well as the TE parent of subconscious INTJ, humility with research and whatnot, and also the personal responsibility through moral principles and standards of FI parent, after these three things have been achieved, the superego finally respects the ego well enough that it is willing to be integrated with the rest of the mind. And this is when the demon function, the fourth gateway, begins this development process. Now before, the ESFP would go instant gratification mode and use the power of the demon to make a Faustian deal to get what it is they want now, at great cost to themselves and even other people, sacrificing other human beings for the sake of what they want. But it's kind of like that King Arthur, kind of like that King Arthur movie that came out recently that was actually terrible. But there's this scene where the bad guy would sacrifice his wife and daughter to like this weird witch that lived in the water underneath his palace in exchange for power, basically. And that's what ESFPs do with their demon. They take the expedient route and they sacrifice someone close to them for the sake of their own greed, basically, their avariciousness, and that can be a problem. Greed, while it is the biggest problem for an ENTJ, ESFPs can be insanely greedy because they're still SFP, NTJ quadra. They still have the same cognitive functions as an ENTJ, but still, they're using this rogue ends justify the means. I'm justified to have this because I've never had anything kind of an effect. It's kind of like that one scene in Psycho-Pass, an anime, where this guy decides to rape this girl because he hates his life, and he's going to rape this girl because he's never had anyone ever, and then he's going to commit suicide immediately following. And that guy was an ESFP. It's very, very scary to see that happen and whatnot. So not a fun story, but you can kind of see how that ENTP rogue just came out. Ends justify the means. I'm going to get mine while I still can, because ESFPs are interest based, right? That's not exactly the most effective thing ever. So, but eventually, the demon function ends up becoming an angelic function, and willing to become an angelic function as the orderly transition into the superego, where it's not about necessarily getting something. It's more about giving, and the ENTP exists to give a better future to other people, because after the ESFP has discovered the ultimate system to provide all the causalities to provide a desired effect, and they're able to do this, they're able to engineer or design a process to finalize it and give it as a gift to humanity. And they do this by realizing the ultimate truth. In all of their research and trying to identify all the causalities out there to create every possible desired effect that an ESFP would ever want, they realize that it could be shared with other people. But the process of identifying all of those causes and effects has actually given them the ability to master truth. Their TI trickster ends up being the most unaware of function. It is the most unaware function, but it becomes the most aware of function for an ESFP. And that super mega high level of awareness is what really ultimately changes things for ESFPs and brings them to a new place, a new way, such that they are able to permanently contribute to a better future for mankind. And this is when an angelic ENTP ends up getting the Nobel Peace Prize. Didn't the first Nobel Peace Prize winner, he invented dynamite, right? For example, so it ends up, the ESFP ends up creating an amazing invention that would be remembered forever, and it contributes to the future of the human race in ways that anyone never thought possible, because while they're trying to create that desired effect that they want by mastering causality, they were able to discover hidden truths and bumble their way into hidden truths along the way. And that is literally the power of ENTP's superego in its angelic form. So instead of trying to essentially steal from their fellow humans, they're able to give the ultimate gift to their fellow humans. And that is something amazing to see from, and it itself, it becomes the ultimate performance that an ESFP could do by giving that gift. It could be like an amazing technology, for example, the gift of that truth, basically, that they're able to provide the rest of humanity, and everyone can benefit from it. I think that's absolutely fantastic and very freeing to know that even ESFPs out there have this potential within them. And I honestly admire them for it, as long as they have the guts to never give up, which is what NI-aspirational with their second gateway is all about. It's absolutely all about that. So As a result, they're no longer removed from reality. They have mastery of truth. They're able to create this perfect symphony, this amazing orchestra, this amazing performance, and give the gift of the truths that they have discovered. And they've discovered these truths innocently, like a child. But because they've innocently discovered these truths, and it's all backed by concrete evidence that is irrefutable, irrefutable, irrefutable proof of a truth that they discovered, the ESFP, through their ENTP angelic superego, will be remembered forever. And then as a result, they have completed their path to enlightenment. If you found this lecture or episode very educational, enlightening, and helpful, please subscribe to it. Wait, you don't have to, because hashtag Patreon gold tier, right? Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this lecture. Thank you all for coming tonight. It's been a fun ride, and this is one of my harder lectures that I did, but nice that I'm just barely over an hour for this one. But yeah, guys, thank you all for your support. Couldn't do it without you. I'm going to go film another lecture immediately following this, and then another one immediately following that one as well. So, but thank you all from the bottom of my heart to you as this community, and we're going to keep the content flowing. So that being said, folks, I'll see you guys tonight.